My father was in Army, and being a brat of Army, you have to travel a lot, and that means going from one place to another. And it was the new house, always the new houses that we would move to. And the thing with new houses is that it brings in new stories, and new stories, some of which are good, and some of which are really bad. And by bad, it means the horrible bad. I was in high school when Father had to move to France. He was in the Strategic Investigations Department or was on a classified mission somewhere. What it meant was being at home alone. And being in the home alone is something that I really like. But sometimes it gets too much because most of the new houses that you are in are sometimes haunted. I'm not even kidding about the part of the new house being empty. But one day, there was something much more worse. I was back at home from the new school I was in. France was especially difficult. I barely knew the language and I had no friends here. I got back from the school and I was already late. I cooked myself a meal and then decided to watch some television. As I switched it on, everything was in French and television was something that I had no interest in then. I waited a while, did my homework, and decided to spend the evening out in the city market, looking out for things. It was then that I decided to catch a cup of coffee and probably a croissant. I got the croissant and went to roam around the city. I was roaming around when I watched the poster for what it said was a freak show, and I decided to enter. I had no idea what it was, but I naturally assumed that it was a freak show, a circus type thing, and I entered. And it was too frantic an entry, and I paid them $1 since it's all I had. So I sat inside, and the seats were made of the wooden board, and there was a center stage. And then after music, a clown appeared and brought glasses of what he called the magic tea for everyone in the audience, and he handed me one, and I took it too. I drank it, and as I was drinking, the first act was the one of a magician, and he said, "For now, the magic is here. I need someone to volunteer, and we will get into the mind of that person, and through his mind, look into the house and things he owned." I remember I raised my hand. I had to. I was new, I barely understood anything, and I was the only one enthusiastic enough in there to raise his hand. And as I did, he called me onto the stage and sat me in the chair. I remember my leg was trippy when I was getting off from the wooden board seats, and then I decided to sit on the chair. And I remember the magician whispering in my ear, "And you shall grant us pass to your home and look for things that we can take." And I remember in a daze I said, "Yes, I grant you the permission." And as he did that, I remember everything to be as light show of its kind, and there was this blurriness in the air. And then he brought out a television set, the LED TV that I owned, and then he brought out the PlayStation that I had, and after, the laptop and camera. He asked me, "Is there anything that I have of value in home?" I was just surprised how he was able to bring out everything that I owned into my new house. And then he said, "Oh, you live in a new house, don't you?" I was surprised by how right he was. I could hear the applauses all over. And then he said, "Your dad is in Army." And again, I was freaked out about the details he knew. And the trickiest deal he told me was the number of beers I had in the fridge. It was phenomenal. That evening couldn't be topped. It was surreal. I remember being very tired at the show and I dozed off. It was night. Thank goodness my father wasn't here or he would have been pissed. I think I slept right there at the wooden seats of the show. When I woke up, I found myself in my house and in my room, and my father was looking at me, and I knew I was in trouble. But it was a wonder. I don't know how I got there. He looked at me and asked, "Where's all our stuff?" And I was confused at him. I thought he brought me home. And then he looked back with more aggressiveness and asked, "Where is all our stuff?" I was confused and looking at his face, not understanding what he was trying to say. My father was not like every other Army sergeant. He was kind and sensitive. But today, it seemed as if he was serious. He asked me again, "Where is your stuff?" And I was still not over the sleep. And then he silently went out and got back with a bucket of water and then poured it all over me and said, "Young Prince, where is all our stuff?" And then I recollected. And then he told me to get down there. I got down and he said, "All our stuff is gone. The television, the PlayStation, and even the beer in the fridge." And then he said, "What happened last night? Recollect it. Now I'm going to bring in the camera tape, idiot." And I went downstairs and saw that the house was completely empty and everything was gone. I was myself surprised, and when I saw my father coming back with the tape, I asked him, "Did you brought me back from the freak show last night?" And he was as surprised and shocked as I was when he said, "Wait, you were out the whole night?" He was in shock, and I asked him, "You didn't bring me back home?" And he looked at me and said, "No, you idiot. I arrived this morning and saw that all the stuff was gone. The front door was closed shut without lock and you were snoring." And he looked at me with suspicion. He asked, "Are you on drugs?" And I said, "No, I'm not on drugs." And then he furiously, with the tape waving in his hands, asked, "Well, then why the hell do you not remember how you got back?" I was equally confused. My father had already alerted the authorities about the break-in, and he said, "Well, the people from the office will be here and will ask you some questions, so you better get your act straight, and let's check these tapes out." He took the tape and then looked at me and said, "Oh, wait, we don't have a television. I wonder how careless can you be?" I snatched the tape from him and started walking. He shouted from behind, "Where are you going?" I told him to just follow me, and he did. About a block away from where our new house was, there was an electrical shop, and I took the tape to him, and then we played the tape at the place. And what I saw next was placing the clues right in the time, and the blocks were filling up. I saw on the tape that I accompanied a group of freaks into my house last night, and they slowly took everything. The television, the laptop, the PlayStation, even the cold beers from the fridge. I still couldn't make sense of the things, and then I made him pause the video and zoom it. And then upon carefully looking at it, I saw what it was. It was the same magician from the last night. He was there along with the clown that got me that drink, and I even remembered the guy from audience. It was the freak show taking our things from our home. Then I realized I was the one who led them to my new house. And then it was all getting back to me, and the realization was pretty shitty. And then I recalled the events of last night, and I realized the drink that the clown served was the reason for everything that had happened. I was drugged by the clown, and then they looted everything in the name of magic. And I was too naive to realize that, but I did. I told everything to Dad, and then he with his resources tracked them all down. But my father asked if I wanted to press charges, but I didn't really want to. All our stuff was back, so instead I didn't see any point. These people could have been worse, but they were not, so I didn't do it. Well, the new house in France brought in a new adventure to me. Now that we are moving to another house, this time in Ukraine, I wonder what new adventure this new house will bring. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
From 1998 to 2001, I lived in a small craftsman-style home in Laurel Mountains, not too far from Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. The home had a twin next door that was built at the same time, but by the time we bought our place, the one next door had been remodeled and expanded so extensively that it was unrecognizable. The story goes that the property belonged to two brothers, and the brother whose house ended up getting a makeover had two sons. But here's the fishy part, which I personally don't buy. Our neighbor in the other house told us that the two boys were werewolves. I didn't know this part of the story until my husband told me later on, after we both had experienced some strange things, which I will elaborate in a moment. When he told my husband about this, he invited him in for a tour of his home. And during the tour, he pulled back the carpet to show my husband a stone pentagram, which was built into the slate of the foyer and the floor. Another fact that was not related to me until later. A month or so passed and we got a really sweet rescue dog, a Sheltie, and she was perfectly friendly, normal, and protective over my 7-year-old daughter. But over the following months, she started doing some strange things. I get up in the middle of the night to find her growling down the stairs at something. And during the day, as I was watching TV or something in my studio, I'm an artist, she would stand between me and the door to the dining room and growl for an inordinate amount of time. Over the months, she began to get a little unpredictable too. She would wet on the carpet, which she had never done up to that point, and eventually she would bite me. By that point, I was pregnant and scared to have a biting dog around a baby, so I took her to the ASPCA. During my pregnancy, I started sleeping in another room away from my husband as he snored like a freight train, and it was hard enough to get rest being big and pregnant. When one night, I woke to something crawling up from the foot end of the bed and over my feet and legs. I couldn't see anything now and was so terrified that I couldn't even scream. I was able to put a hand up and grab the headboard. This was an old, rickety double bed that my mother-in-law had given us for our spare room and slammed it against the wall repeatedly. With that noise, I was finally able to scream, and whatever was on my legs disappeared. I ran to the hall to find my husband running to meet me and asking me what had happened, and I didn't know what to say. That winter, a few months after the baby was born, I was sleeping in the room with the baby who was in his crib, and my mother was visiting. We'd all be enjoying an evening in front of the fireplace, and the whole house was warm and toasty. When we went to the bed late at night, probably around midnight, I woke at 2 a.m. to the baby screaming, and when I tried to get up, I was so ice cold, I could barely move. My mom and husband heard the baby screaming and came into the room to see what was wrong. Then my husband said, "Why the hell is it so cold in here?" The door was open the whole time, by the way. So my mom took the baby out of the room and my husband helped me out to the hallway beyond the open door, and the rest of the house was still toasty warm. Thank God we ended up moving out the following summer. But before we had, my husband said he'd spoken to the neighbor about our experiences, and he said, "Oh yeah, the 2 werewolf boys' father had killed them, and then himself, and the boys' ghosts roam the 2 properties."
The new house on the Edmonton. We will call it the new house. The house is quite old, older than one can imagine it to be. But it is called the new house as every month there is a new family that comes to live in that house, and every month they move away. The new house on the Edmonton is a place that you definitely want to stay away from. It has been more of a fun experience for us as a neighborhood watching all these families get spooked out and leaving too soon. But for us, it has been hilarious trails to see them all go. All families leaving one by one. Was the house haunted? Yes, it was. But why were we not bothered by it? Well, the answer was clear when the Donald family moved here. As per routine, the first day of Donald family was calm and collective, and then, the very next day, they saw their first apparition in the house, and the second day, things were moving fast for them. The Donalds were a weird bunch. They almost had no luggage when they came to the place. The first step they took was completely make it different. The things were placed different, and they were in some very weird things. And we realized there was something more to them, and we soon realized it. The second week during midnight, they did the ceremony of catching a ghost. They made sure that somebody watched so they could set up the live stream, and as they did, they continued the ceremony. And when they did, they turned out to smoke a weird herb, and what it did was mellowed the ghost, and it fell and rolled out over the front. They quickly jumped out on the ghost, and after a while, they revealed the true identity of the ghost. It was the real estate agent who would try to lure all these people out so he can scam them and the company could get commissions from the house. It was the most hilarious scam we ever saw in the neighborhood, and we were sorry for those poor souls who fell for the stupid joke. Everybody still talks about people who fell for the ghost in the new house.
Going back many, many years for this, I grew up in Northern California in a quite poor rural area. Some of my best friends from elementary and middle school lived like 10 to 15 miles away. So on weekends, instead of just going over to visit for the day, we'd have sleepovers to save our parents driving on these crazy road trips. So I had this one friend called Star, whose parents were like old school hippies. Their house always smelled of patchouli, and they were vegan even before vegan was even really a thing. Aside from a few unusual recreational activities, they were basically just as good as being parents as any other couple. They were sweet, loving, and attentive, and I always had a ball whenever I went to sleep over at their place, mainly because they let us stay outdoors in a tent at night, which was just a huge adventure for a little group of preteen tomboys. Anyways, this one night we were staying in a tent in the backyard, but it was a backyard that extended to one side of the house where we camped, and it is in the view of the TV room window, so Star's mom and dad could keep an eye on us. But it also meant we could see the driveway from the flap of our tent. It was summertime, and so it was still incredibly warm at night. We ended up leaving the tent flat and unzipped to let some cool air in. It obviously wasn't open all the way because of the bugs, but we can still see outside the tent. And then, in the middle of the night, Star shakes me up, wakes me, and whispers, "There's someone in the driveway." I am thinking it might have been her big brother, who was a few years older than us and was attending college. But when I suggested that, she said, "No, it's a bunch of people. Look." I start getting real anxious hearing that, so I quietly creep up to the tent flat to peek out, and that's when I saw that Star was exactly right. In the little bit of moonlight that we had, I literally lost count of the number of people I saw creeping up her driveway. It was seriously one of the scariest moments of my life, mainly because there was absolutely nothing to do but keep it quiet as possible. We couldn't call the cops. This was way before cell phones. We couldn't warn Star's parents without revealing our presence. We were just powerless, forced to watch people who obviously didn't have good intentions slowly approaching Star's house. I think in the end, Star just broke, and in a move you could either call it real brave or real stupid, she just ran out of the tent shouting, "Get away from my house! Mom, Dad, call the cops!" As soon as she starts screaming, a bunch of flashlights burst into life, obviously held by the guy sneaking up the driveway. And oh my god, there were so many of them. At first glance in the darkness, it looked no more than about 5 or 6 people, but when they all turned their flashlights on, it was clear the number was no more than like 15 or 20. I just hear sheriffs saying, "Show me your hands." And that was incredibly confusing, because we were all about calling the cops to get help, but like the cops were already here. Anyways, Star did as she was told, and so did me and my other friends. We start climbing out of our tent with our hands in the air. That was when the person approaching us started saying, "Jesus, they're just kids, man." And with them being closer, I could see that they really were cops with caps and badges and all the patches on their arms and all that stuff. I heard, "Go, go, go, get in there." And the cops started bashing the front door to the house. Other cops gathered around the backyard and headed towards one of the barns. We were scared, obviously, but more so focused on just staying down and watching. We were not really freaking out too bad, but when the cops started dragging Star's mom and dad out of the house and arresting them, she had to be restrained by the cop that was guarding us. After that, the cops drove me and our friends back to our respective homes. Then I don't know what they did with Star. I think they took her to her grandma's or aunt's or whatever. But then a few days later, we found out that Star's mom and dad had been growing something they shouldn't have in one of their barns. I get that it was illegal and stuff, but the aftermath was just so sad. Star had to go and live with her relatives because her parents were sent off to prison for a few years. It was messed up. And I get that the cops are just doing their job and stuff, but it was definitely one of the scariest times of my life, seeing all those figures in black just creeping towards my friend's house.